Here's what we're watching today. Taiwan has just said no to one of the boldest demands Washington has made in years. The idea that half of Taiwan's semiconductor production should be relocated to the United States. On the surface, it sounds like a trade dispute. But in reality, it cuts right to the heart of global technology, sovereignty, and geopolitics. Let's walk through what happened, why it matters, and where this might go next. The United States has been pushing hard to secure its semiconductor supply chains. We all remember the global chip shortages during the pandemic. Cars sat unfinished, phones and consoles were delayed, and industries from defense to healthcare were scrambling. Those shortages exposed just how fragile the supply chain really was, and how dependent the world is on one tiny island, Taiwan. Through companies like TSMC, Taiwan manufactures the vast majority of the world's most advanced chips, the ones at the cutting edge of 5 nanometers and below. Some analysts put it at more than 90%. That means if something were to happen to Taiwan, whether a natural disaster, a blockade, or a military conflict, the world's technological heartbeat would skip. The U.S. has already been pouring billions into trying to rebuild its domestic chip industry. The CHIPS and Science Act, signed a few years ago, has put money into new fabs in Arizona, New York, and elsewhere. Intel is trying to stage a comeback. Samsung has broken ground in Texas, and TSMC itself is building in the American desert. But progress has been slow, costs have been high, and the expertise is still concentrated in Taiwan. So Washington went a step further. Officials floated the idea that Taiwan should commit to a 50-50 production split. Half of the semiconductors destined for U.S. use should be made in the United States. In other words, move massive amounts of capacity, not just a few factories, onto American soil. Taiwan's response was immediate and firm. No. Vice Premier Cheng Li-chiun said plainly that Taiwan never agreed to such a demand and would not accept it. From Taipei's perspective, this isn't just about economics. It's about sovereignty, leverage, and survival. For years, analysts have spoken about Taiwan's silicon shield. The idea is simple. As long as Taiwan is the hub of the world's chipmaking, the world has a stake in protecting it. Moving half of that production abroad would chip away at that shield, leaving Taiwan less central, less indispensable, and potentially more vulnerable to pressure from Beijing. Taipei is willing to cooperate. It's not against investment in the U.S. or joint projects, but hollowing out its own strategic industry, that's a red line. Washington, on the other hand, sees the risk differently. For U.S. leaders, the nightmare scenario is this. China takes control of Taiwan, and overnight, the world's most advanced chip-making technology falls into the hands of America's strongest competitor. It's not just about iPhones and gaming consoles. It's about AI processors, defense systems, satellites, even nuclear command and control infrastructure. Losing access, or worse, handing it to Beijing, would be a seismic shift in global power. So in Washington's calculus, pulling production closer to home is insurance, painful, expensive, but essential. Both sides have logic on their side. For the U.S., it's about securing supply chains and insulating itself from geopolitical shocks. For Taiwan, it's about preserving its lifeline. The clash comes when those two logics collide. Asking Taiwan to move half its chipmaking abroad is like asking Saudi Arabia to move half its oil fields to Texas. It undercuts the very foundation of the country's economic security. And Taiwan's leaders know that once capacity is gone, it may never come back. This rejection doesn't mean cooperation is ending. TSMC is still building in Arizona. The U.S. is still subsidizing billions in chip plants. Taiwan has indicated it's open to partnerships, just not at the expense of gutting its home industry. But it does signal limits to how far Taiwan is willing to go. At the negotiating table, Taiwan is offering concessions in other areas, agriculture, trade, but chips remain off-limits for forced relocation. For Washington, that leaves a dilemma. Does it double down, using tariffs or Section 232 national security investigations to push Taiwan harder? Does it pour even more into domestic chip subsidies, hoping to grow capacity without pulling it from Taipei? Or does it accept that, for now, Taiwan is the world's indispensable hub, and work to manage the risk rather than eliminate it? None of those choices are easy. And then there's Beijing. Watching from across the strait, China sees Taiwan's semiconductor dominance as both a temptation and a frustration. Beijing has invested heavily in its own chip industry, but despite progress, it still lags years behind at the cutting edge. Taking control of Taiwan's fabs would catapult China into the lead. That's one reason analysts warn that semiconductors are more than just an economic question. They're a national security flashpoint. So we end up with this triangular tension. Taiwan is protecting its shield, the US is trying to build insurance, and China is waiting, watching, and pushing from the sidelines. What happens next will depend on trade negotiations, industrial policy, and perhaps the unpredictable twists of geopolitics. For now, the bottom line is clear. Taiwan is not willing to surrender half its chip-making capacity to foreign soil. The US is not willing to keep living with the risk of a single point of failure. And the world is left with a technology supply chain balanced on a knife's edge. The next time you check your phone or fire up your laptop, remember, behind the screen lies a global contest over silicon, sovereignty, and survival. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying these deep dives into the stories shaping our world, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We'll keep bringing you the context behind the headlines, because understanding today's challenges is the first step to preparing for tomorrow.